CyberTech worlds clash by outlaw realms, a Harry Potter, DC, Marvel crossover. Chapter 11. Luna. Hermione was feeling worried as she stepped into the elevator and watched the doors close. Today would be her first session of treatment and she was still not sure what to expect. And to top things off, she still hadn't decided on what she should do about the job offer. Ginny and Amanda wanted her to take the job and just quit Hogwarts and the Order. She knew she would be safer working at CyberTech, as well as richer, and all around happier, and she wasn't sure why it was taking her so long to make up her mind, as she was sure she knew what she was going to do. Hermione also had to worry about what Dumbledore would do if she handed in her notice or just didn't turn up again. In addition, the prospect of finding an apartment in London and having it secured against magical attack or intrusion was a daunting task at best. However, on the brighter side of the new job were not only the learning opportunities, but the chance to see more of the world and the increase in pay. Heck, compared to her job at Hogwarts, the benefits came to more than her yearly pay at Hogwarts and healthcare etc. combined. It was a wonder anyone wanted to teach at that school if they realized they would get paid so much more money in the Muggle world. Hermione had done a little snooping with Seraph's help to compare jobs in the magical world with the Muggle world out of curiosity, and realized the magical community was seriously underpaying people, especially considering how few mage there were, so specialist positions like runes, especially, should pay extremely well. She found her research to be damning much possibility of her staying with Hogwarts. Sure, she was not greedy, but her salary would never allow her to rent her own flat, but with a job in Wonderland on Miss Klein's team she could rent a house if she wanted, or get a mortgage. She shook her head clear. Hermione believed one of the uppoints of taking this new job was that she would never have to put up with Dumbledore's stupidity or Snape's evil sneering ever again. She had recently started hearing some messed up things about Snape's house, Slytherin, and they were not about how evil the Slytherins were. Hermione had gone to Dumbledore for answers while McGonagall, the school's deputy head, was present, and the older woman had both grimaced and looked uncomfortable, most certainly having brought up the subject herself at one time or more. The old man had just smiled with that blasted twinkle in his eyes, and said if they were true, it would be for the greater good that we leave it be, as Severus was an important spy, and the Slytherins should be left as they are because it would bring too much trouble with their Death Eater parents. Hermione hadn't really believed in Dumbledore since that day, but she never mentioned it again, as she knew nobody would ever go against Dumbledore. However, now there were people standing up to him, and Hermione figured that she should probably let Harry know of her suspicions. If it was true, or even just partially true, then something needed to be done sooner rather than later. Hermione supposed she would only be adding fuel to the fire, but if it would put Dumbledore and his greater good in their places, then she would stoke the fire until it burned Dumbledore to ashes. Even though it could be her worrying over nothing, it was better to be sure rather than regretful at a later date. The lift finally reached the medical facility B3. She still wasn't sure how many departments or floors the medical R&D had, and she stepped out taking deep breaths. She should have perhaps let Amanda and Ginny take her for her own comfort. She had never really liked hospitals, and after the tests she went through the day before, who could blame her if she disliked them even more? Hermione entered through the security doors, not at all surprised they just opened for her to enter, and the security by their desk only greeted her unconcerned as she passed through the security scanners. Walking down the corridor, Hermione was getting more nervous by the second before she came to the correct door, greeting a few people along the way. She took one last deep breath before knocking and waiting a moment before the door automatically swished open. Hermione stepped in to see a man in his late 20s, early 30s with normally plain brown hair, but he had golden highlights in it. He was wearing some dark pinkish burgundy scrubs with his name badge pinned to them. The doctor grinned widely at Hermione as he came over to greet her, taking her hand. "You must be Hermione," he acknowledged in a surprisingly soft voice and a slight Irish accent. "I'm Dr. McGinnis, but you can just call me Trevor, okay darling?" Okay, Trevor," she replied nervously as he released her hand. She had never met such a friendly doctor before. Well, I always believe that time shouldn't be wasted, he continued. So, it's a good idea if you disrobe while we await the nurses, he said with a smile, gesturing to a curtained-off section of his cream-colored office where she could change behind. She nodded as she walked past his desk where a holographic window still hovered and took note that it was her medical file. There are some clean bathrobes on the hook, please feel free to put one on when you have removed all items of clothing, and any jewelry you may be wearing, and that includes watches, and contact lenses. Hermione nodded as she slid out of sight and quickly started undressing. You can leave your belongings behind on the table, it shall be perfectly safe, he continued talking. Yours, I must say, is a very unusual case, but I dare say we'll have you right as rain as soon as possible. I understand that it could be because of exposure to some kind of demonic creature, and if this happened because of such short-term exposure, I would loathe to know how bad it's progressed in the human guards or God forbid the prisoners. Hermione shivered at the thought. I haven't really thought on that too much, but yeah. It can't be good at all. The doctor was probably going to reply when she heard the door open. Sorry we're late, doctor. Two female voices cried out together, huffing for breath. That's quite all right, he answered. But what happened this afternoon? Did you both oversleep? Together? He asked the last teasingly. Don't be silly, one said, annoyed. We were early and went to have breakfast in the cafe, and we were just minding our own bloody business, almost finished and ready to leave when. Cornelia Klein. The other girl finished, exasperated. Ah, say no more, girls, he replied laughingly. Miss Klein captured you both and you were having trouble getting away. Yeah, the first one said, just as Hermione came out from around the curtain, only wearing a thin white dressing gown. Oh, hello, one of the nurses smiled as she brushed her short brown hair behind her left ear. I'm Nurse Mandy Higgins, she introduced herself, gesturing to her white and blue scrubs. You must be Miss Granger, you can just call me Nurse Mandy, otherwise you'll get mixed up with my sister, she added, gesturing to her equally dressed identical twin sister, except her hair was longer, down to her neck and carefully tied back with a lighter shade of blue in her eyes. They looked younger than the doctor, maybe early 20s, possibly student nurses. I'm Sandy, she replied with a nod. And please don't make any jokes, we've heard them all. Hermione smiled a little as a few childish jokes passed her by. Okay, but why would you two be sleeping together? She asked, confused, before glaring at the doctor. You are being a pervert, right? She was shocked as all three burst out laughing. Good one, giggled Mandy. He was just joking because he found out we had spent last week sharing a bed at our apartment because mine broke when we moved into our own flat, and it took a week for my new bed to arrive and I didn't want to sleep on the floor or couch. We always used to share a lot anyway when we were little. Trevor was just teasing us. His twin fantasies don't include girls, silly. Hermione blinked in confusion. You mean boys and girls like Harry and Amy? The doctor laughed while Mandy and Sandy giggled. Not really, though Mr. Avalon does look delicious, Trevor answered, and Hermione double-took as she blushed in realization. But enough of this, Miss Granger, we have to get you prepared and in for your treatment. It will only take 3 hours, but I assure you, Miss Granger, that you'll feel well rested. Hermione nodded as she followed the doctor, with the twins bringing up the rear, chatting to her about stuff, mainly about how hot Harry was and how lucky she was to personally know him. And about their new apartment costing more than they had originally thought and being unable to wait till they're no longer students so they're paid more. Hermione sighed. They were just as bad as Amanda and Ginny and wondered whether it would be a good idea to introduce them. Huh? Hermione asked as she looked at the large metal and glass pod thing in a large white room next to a second one. Her doctor sighed. Mandy and Sandy have gone through the regular routine, so now it's my turn for the main event, he said while the twins nodded sagely. You're going to remove your robe and get in, placing your legs and arms in the grooves within the seat. Then while the twins set you up with the breathing respirators, I shall be strapping you in and placing in a few needles. After that we shall lock you in and the machine will fill with a transparent green liquid. Please don't panic as it will flood your respirators, it's only to assist your breathing. As you can breathe the fluid, let it seep into your lungs and try not to panic. The breathing respirators are pretty much to assist against the fluid's pressure as it is 3 times the density of water. Hermione nodded with a grimace. So, I'm going to be stuck with needles and drowned in breathable liquid? She asked and the 3 nodded. So, what exactly is this liquid? It's a synthetic human cells cultivated from your exams yesterday, said Mandy with a reassuring smile. They help the regeneration process. In several years they're hoping that these things will take only several hours at most to do what can take up to a year to do now. Though, these things are pretty neat now. If you just spend a day in one it can heal every average physical wound that is healable, and I understand that R&D are looking to even regenerate limbs or organs. You mean these could take away the need for wheelchairs? Possibly. Well, come along, Miss Granger, Trevor said as he gestured the seat, but Hermione looked nervous. He rolled his eyes. Don't worry, Hermione, I've seen it all before, and I assure you so have Mandy and Sandy, as if you hadn't noticed they are girls. Hermione sighed as she slipped out of her robe with scarlet cheeks as she handed it to one of the twins, and slid onto her seat, placing her arms and legs where earlier prompted. Oh, wow, you have a lot of hair, mocked Sandy, amused. It would have been better if you shaved it all off as the system already has to deal with head hair, but there are no entrances on top of your head, so it doesn't much matter, as long as ears, nose and mouth are unobstructed. However, this fluid enters through every entrance, through the pores, to your eyes, mouth, nose, and even your vagina, so it makes sense you remove pubic hair especially when it grows so thick. But don't worry if you need help because you haven't done it before. Mandy and I shall help you out any time you need it, if you want. It's all a part of being nurses after all, and we are all yours, we have our orders. Thanks, Hermione muttered, extremely embarrassed and not sure whether the nurse was just teasing her or not, as the doctor started clamping her legs with padded metal, and her cheeks flamed up even more at the compromising position. While the doctor was working on the clamps, Mandy easily opened Hermione's mouth and slid a tube carefully down her throat and comfortably, the mouth and nose cover piece, but Hermione noted it had slits in it to let the fluid down her mouth and up her nose so she could breathe normally even with the help of the breathing device. Hermione then started as she felt a quick sharp pain on her right inner thigh and realized she had been clamped down, and the doctor used some kind of tape to hold the needle in, or little plastic tube thing, before continuing to find a new vein in her other thigh with another needle while the nurses were connecting the standard safety gear, heart monitor, etc. onto her chest, ribs, and fingers to monitor her health. It only took a few minutes but felt like a year when they had finished and were checking over all of the systems before they finally closed the hatch on her, leaving her alone to her fears. Okay, Hermione sweetie. The doctor asked from some speaker in the pod, and she could just about nod as she realized her head was also held. Okay, the synthetic fluid is coming now. Once you start breathing it regularly, I'll feed you a light anesthetic to help you relax, and hopefully you'll fall asleep, so don't start panicking if you feel drowsy, okay? She again managed a nod. And after the anesthetic I'll be introducing a few other steroids into your system. I believe the doctor yesterday informed you of possible side effects. Hermione nodded one last time as the side effects of the drugs weren't very troublesome, just annoying, so she hoped they didn't affect her. She startled as she felt a liquid jelly hit her feet and toes. It felt strangely like squishy water and was pleasantly cool against her skin. She had expected it to make a noise, but it was silent as it quickly traveled up her legs, and she knew the heart rate monitor was having a field day as her heart picked up speed. Soon the fluid covered Hermione's whole body, head included, and first her body reacted on instinct to hold her breath as she felt the weird liquid on her lips and tasted it on her tongue. It had a weird bittersweet taste to it, and as she finally squirmed and breathed in the stuff it had an oddly familiar taste and smell, as well as feeling odd to breathe in liquid. Hermione looked up as she felt her eyelids grow heavy. she was surprised when the pod started moving until it clicked into an upright position and she was practically floating in the stuff. Though, the more she thought about what the stuff was, the more she realized she was floating in her own artificially created goop. She realized she was floating in herself. It was an odd feeling, but not too unpleasant. It sounded weirder than it felt. Welcome to another meeting of the Order of the Phoenix. Albus Dumbledore said happily to the other members of the Order as they sat around a huge room watching him eagerly, while some were just here, Sirius Black, because he had nothing better to do, and since Harry and Amanda actually had jobs and worked, he couldn't hang out with them all day. Though, if Harry did branch out into the pranking business, maybe Sirius could get in on that action too. With him, Harry and the Weasley twins, they could become unstoppable. I have gathered you all here once more to discuss our kidnapped savior. The old man said this with so much conviction that if Sirius hadn't known the truth, he may have actually believed Amanda had been kidnapped. We cannot allow the Muggles to keep Amanda Potter. She belongs to us, and we shall not let a few well-connected Muggles and a squib wannabe get away with taking what is ours and threatening us. So tonight, I propose we force the Muggles to give her back by taking the Prime Minister by force, as the Muggles must be stopped. Sirius held in a groan. He could see this ending badly. Albus, do you not realize that if this bullshit fails? He spoke up quickly. The Order of the Phoenix, the magical world, will have openly declared war on the Muggles. He said, glaring at the old man. I may not know much about the Muggle world, but I do know that companies as big as CyberTech are not to be trifled with, even by the government, and that's if you succeed. Nonsense, they are just Muggles, Molly Weasley declared angrily. And they've taken what doesn't belong to them, so we must do what we can to stop them. Neither Ginny nor Amanda are property. A young blonde woman interrupted, her normally dreamy blue eyes as hard as steel and cold as ice. If you keep following this annoying old man's bull, then you will end up getting hurt. There are people fighting for your lives, and yet you condemn them because of him. I think I would no longer like any part in this foolishness. She stood to leave and wasn't surprised as she found several others stand too with wands pointed at her. I'm afraid we can't allow you to leave, Miss Lovegood, as we have no doubt who you'll go to with this information, said Dumbledore a little too smugly for her tastes. I see, she replied, looking bored as her eyes carefully took everything in. So, you not only intend on kidnapping Amanda, Ginny and the Prime Minister, but now you wish to kidnap me too. I do not personally believe I need to inform Amanda of your upcoming attack, as I'm sure they may be well prepared for such an act from the Death Eaters. Though, of course you are correct in the fact that I will most assuredly be heading to inform Amanda of your digressions. You people say the Death Eaters must be stopped. However, when someone starts stopping them, you bitch and moan about the methods they use. You're pathetic, Professor Dumbledore, and must certainly enjoy this suffering. That's enough, girl. Dumbledore spoke, his calm demeanor faltering. I shall not have you speaking to me like that, you foolish little girl. I know what I am doing, and I shall not have any weak and foolish Muggle coming into our world and murdering ancient pureblood families just because they have made a mistake in joining Voldemort. They should have the right to a second chance. Luna was furious as she spat back in reply. You selfish fucking bastard, what about all of the families they've murdered, ruined, raped, and tortured? The greater fucking good, my ass, you shithead. You're only thinking about your pureblood society. Then what happens to the Muggles? These bastards are murdering them, are they any less important than us? Of course, they are, we have magic. Hissed out Ron Weasley angrily. The Muggles should keep out of our business. This is their business too. Luna hissed, enraged more than she could ever remember. They've suffered more deaths than we have, you selfish bastards, and if they want to fight back then they shall, and from what I see there is nothing you can do to stop them short of declaring war, which I'm seriously doubting will make a difference. The Muggles have whole militaries trained in combat, and if they were to add the Cyber Knights technology into the mix, you're fucked. Nonsense, Dumbledore jumped in, but Luna detected her first hint of doubt, and dare she think it? Fear from him. We could put a stop to that murdering muggle anytime if we put together a strike team. Just like Voldemort tried, she sneered. You really are blind. Science has finally caught up with and potentially surpassed magic. They can see through our wards, they can get the address and coordinates from an unplottable location. Magic has lost its dominance over science. You're talking rubbish, James Potter hissed out. Magic will always be superior. James you prat, Sirius growled. You've lost everything of worth for this foolish old man, are you willing to lose anything more? Shut up you idiot! He shouted in return, but yelped out as a greying brown-haired man wearing old tattered robes blasted him with a blue light from his wand. Lily Potter was about to retaliate against him when a scarred and battered older man with peg leg and weird eye beat her to it, though his spell was intercepted by one of the Weasley twins while the other blasted him into unconsciousness. Sirius gained his bearings and quickly fired at Lily, but she blocked it as the pair became a blur of movement. Give it up, Lily. The world has changed, and we've been in here missing it. You should be proud of your son. He took a mother's betrayal and built an empire from nothing. It was for the better. She cried out as she dodged and weaved firing spells. Albus said. She trailed off realizing that she wasn't putting up much of an argument. Stop her! Dumbledore roared out as Luna Lovegood made a run for the fireplace during the commotion. He fired several shots at her in his anger just as she shouted something and threw in the Floo powder. It all stopped for a moment as blood splattered the fireplace and her scream of pain echoed as she disappeared into the emerald flames. Dumbledore, you, Sirius muttered in horror as he, the twins and Remus were finally subdued and bound. It's all for the better if she dies, Dumbledore spoke calmly but looked shaken. She is only a menace to the greater good, and if she makes it to St. Mungo's we'll find out about it and take her into custody with these other traitors to the Order, he said quickly firing a stunner at Arthur Weasley. Just to be on the safe side, Molly, as you know he doesn't care that Amanda and Ginevra have been kidnapped. Molly Weasley nodded. I completely agree, Albus. Mum! How could you? Raged Fred. She's your daughter, she's freaking 22 and has the legal right to live wherever, and with whoever she wants. I don't care, Fred, she retorted angrily. I am not having my only daughter being with a squib wannabe who kidnapped her and the girl who lived. What they are doing is disgusting. George snorted. You always said Ginny should marry for nothing but love, and now you're trying to deny her what she wants. I would rather her marry that Malfoy boy than another girl. She declared to their shock. At least he is set up in gold, and his blood is pure magic, and they could give me wonderful magical grandchildren. You're fucking crazy, Fred laughed humorlessly. Hermione sighed as she finished up in the shower and looked down at her smooth area as she grabbed her towel. She had let Sandy and Mandy, even though she was still unsure whether it was a tease taken too far, shave and laser her, so she didn't have to worry for a few weeks about the hair growing back too fast before taking a shower to clear off all the hagoo and why the hell did she feel so horny. And she was planning on speaking to Cornelia about her job offer. It was one of those stupid drug side effects, why did she have to suffer this one? She shook her head clear as she dried herself off and slid into her clothes, which the twins brought her from the doctor's office. Well, all things considered, Hermione had not felt this well rested and fresh in years. She chuckled a bit as her next set of appointments, twice a week, had been arranged, and she had gotten herself a place to stay. She had been talking with Mandy and Sandy about her searching for a place, and they jumped at the chance of filling their third room as it would take pressure off them money-wise, plus they could all drive into work together, so that saved money too. Hermione found herself happy with the arrangement as she placed away the apartment key they gave her, and headed out onto the elevator, and stepped in after saying her goodbyes to a few people she had already met, and that she would meet the twins this evening after work so they could take her home. She was surprised the elevator began moving without her stating where to go, but figured Seraph knew all about it and was letting her through, or maybe she asked for security clearance. Hermione stopped at the correct floor and was surprised again to find Cornelia waiting for her, though she was wearing some tight blue jeans and a low-cut black top to accentuate her large breasts under her white coat this time. "Hello again, beautiful," Cornelia spoke with a smirk as she stepped into the elevator and it began descending. She then pulled something out of her pocket and quickly pinned it to Hermione's top, making care to touch her a little too intimately, and Hermione barely held back the groan. Cornelia laughed. "I'm glad it's that side effect," she commented amusedly while Hermione blushed. "Don't worry, I won't try anything much while you're still drugged up," she added while Hermione checked out her Wonderland ID badge with her picture. "How do you know I would take the job?" Hermione asked suspiciously. Cornelia laughed while rolling her eyes. "You kind of remind me of a younger me, and I practically humped the woman who invited me to join Wonderland 2 years ago." "Yes. I can attest to that." Seraph agreed laughingly through the system. "I had to switch to soft light to get away." "Well, it was awesome," Cornelia said with a wild gesture. "Heading a black research and development department where I can choose what I want to do." Hermione couldn't help but smile at the enthusiasm the woman tried to contain. "Anyway," Cornelia continued as she realized Seraph wasn't going to interrupt again, "I thought I could buy you some lunch at the Avalon restaurant on the ground floor to celebrate and get to know each other a little more. It does some very good food. If you haven't tried it before, it's a must. We can get to grips if only a little about what differences we hold as we are going to work together, and hopefully create wondrous things that will make all of our nerdiest birdies super hot with desire." "That would be nice, thank you." "I think," Hermione answered uncertainly, "but that didn't sound too bad, as being admired was every smart person's desire, wasn't it?" Cornelia laughed as she placed her right hand on the back of Hermione's waist and led her out of the lift while she shuddered a little. Luna Lovegood had been unlucky when she woke from her fall out of the fireplace that her father wasn't home to get her help, but she had managed to drag herself out of the house and extra wards, and leaving a trail of blood as she cried out in pain, holding her left side as it felt very exposed, and stung like nothing she could imagine. She also breathed hard and pained as she just about managed to pick herself up, and thought she was going to tear herself up, as she apparated and collapsed to an alleyway near CyberTech HQ. Luna's vision started blurring as she picked herself up and crawled out of the alley dizzily and staggering with the sun bearing down on her. She struggled on, staggering on her knees before she heard what could have been voices and felt someone lift her to her feet, half dragging, half carrying her. "Help! Help!" The police officer yelled as he lowered the young woman onto the floor of CyberTech's lobby toward the information and reception desks, while his partner tried to help stem the bleeding as she was now drifting in and out and kept muttering something about a war if he heard correct. "Luna!" A brown-haired young woman yelled in horror as she suddenly sprinted from where she had been heading through a light crowd towards the restaurant with a blonde woman hot on her heels, and dropped next to them. Hermione looked to the blonde woman as she began trying to stem the bleeding, taking over from the other policeman with a first aid kit. A receptionist quickly rushed over as she knelt with them to help. "Come on, stop bleeding," Cornelia muttered heatedly as she continued working. "I'm not a freaking medical doctor and you are way too cute to die." Within 30 seconds of the police bringing the blonde in, a team of doctors and nurses rushed out of the elevator, shoving people who were trying to pretend they weren't watching out of the way. They had medical kits, a crash cart, a trolley bed and many other things people within the lobby had no name for. "Luna," Hermione cried. "Who did this? Who the hell?" Luna reached out and grabbed Hermione's hand tight as the medical team started treating her, blood soaking her lips. Dumbledore did this?" Hermione demanded, and the blonde nodded tiredly. No one took note of one of the policemen taking notes. "Why? What happened? I know he's a foolish bastard, but why attack you?" Luna coughed, but the doctors ignored it and continued, finally getting the bleeding to stop with some white foam jelly congealing within the wound, causing Luna to sigh with the cool relief from it. He wants Amy back, but most of them, purists, she coughed again, and a nurse reprimanded her for talking, but Luna went on. The order is going to try to kidnap the Prime. Her eyes fluttered closed as she had been lightly sedated and lost consciousness. Hermione groaned as she watched her friend getting lifted onto the trolley bed and wheeled away. The Prime. Hermione gasped. The Prime Minister, she muttered, but was sure only the police and Cornelia were close enough to hear. We have to inform Harry. He'll already know, and no doubt getting your friend the best of care, Cornelia interrupted the worried girl, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder, seeing how worried she was. Don't worry, I'm sure Harry already has the minister's back. Excuse me, one policeman interrupted suspiciously. But I believe we would like to know what all of that was about, he said, eyeing their badges nervously. Nothing, Luna is an employee, Cornelia said, trying to come up with a lie. However, the police had no time to respond, and Cornelia was coming up short in the lie department when one officer's radio went off and someone, their chief by the sound of it, began talking. I understand that you are both at CyberTech head office. Yes, sir. We were both going on our break and the sandwich bar outside is. I want you to leave immediately, the man over the radio interrupted, and forget about whatever it is you've seen or heard. But sir, he tried to say as he was looking around for support, but watched as the receptionist was sneaking away, and noticed how far away all the staff and visitors were, as a large number of security was ushering everyone on their way, and the doctors and victim had left in a distant lift. This is a direct order from the Prime Minister's office, the man over the radio interrupted again. Do you understand? Yes, sir, they both finished nervously, as they looked to the women one last time before hurrying out, confused as they gave each other a look before shrugging and heading for the sandwich bar in the outside CyberTech pavilion, where there was a public bathroom they could use to wash up before getting lunch. Hermione and Cornelia looked at each other in surprise before the blonde let a small cheeky smile light her lips. That's the sort of shit you only see in the movies, Cornelia declared before she was startled as Seraph appeared next to them while rolling her eyes. Harry wants you both in his office now. You'll be free to visit Miss Lovegood once she is awake. Okay. To be continued. Yet another chapter read, and up. I hope you enjoyed it enough to subscribe, and if you feel up to it, leave a like, or even comment if you so desire. Anyway, you can also follow me on Twitter at Outlaw Realms.